This man is the guy who I look up to because he gets the best hockey team in the NHL performing at the top of their game. We are incredibly fortunate to be joined by Kevin Neeld, and he is an expert in elite performance in high stakes environments. He is the director of performance for the Boston Bruins. Following years of head performance coach, he has also been the strength and conditioning coach for the San Jose Sharks. Same for the USA Hockey Women's National Team. He is the president of his own company, Neeld Performance. We really love high performing individuals, and we love to sit there and have that coaching, that opportunity to hear that. And as veterans, we understand the unique demands of the performance level of individuals like the Boston Bruins and everyone else. Before I go too far, please give Kevin a very loud round of applause for joining us today. And before we sit here, and I usually ask my normal warm-up question, Kevin, my first question to you is the plan for the Stanley Cup. Is it going to be a complete sweep, or are we going to give the opponent maybe one or two games to give them a little bit of hope?
I really appreciate the confidence that you're showing in the organization. We've been fortunate to get off to a good start here, but we're taking things one game at a time.
I was expecting that answer. I just had to say it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm originally from South Boston, so this is a huge, huge thing for me for sure. Kevin, your experience is remarkable, and individuals like you are really fascinating. I first heard of individuals like you because I actually got to deal with Ted Harper, who's with the Patriots, when he was at SOCOM. So people like you, like, give us your origin story. Like, how did you get into this? Like, we see everything, on paper in the background, but like, give us your origin story, man. How'd you get into this?
Yeah, I think for me it started as an early teenager. I was a very exceptionally mediocre athlete, hockey player that ended up having an opportunity to cross paths with a coach that at the time put a really big emphasis on the off ice training side of things and also on teaching the skill of skating. And he ran a bunch of power skating clinics in schools. I was stayed on with him in the off seasons to help run some of those. And I think for me at that age, Clay, like I was 13 at the time, and I just really gained an appreciation for the idea of if you put in the extra work, you can, not only make progress and start to really tap into your own full potential, but also it's a competitive advantage. It's an opportunity to, outwork some of the other people that may be, fighting for the same jobs on teams. So, I really fell in love with that part of it at a young age, both on the ice and off the ice. And, as the time to start looking at college majors approached, I, probably would have said at the time that I was equally interested in a path along the lines of strength and conditioning or coaching hockey and continuing to, run on ice skill development clinics and kind of head down that path. And, I went to the University of Delaware as an undergrad. I told the advisor at the time that I wanted to learn more about training athletes. I still remember, she said, like, we have a major called athletic training. And at the time I was like, well, those are the same words that I said, just in the opposite order. So that sounds great. And I signed up for that. And then one orientation meeting in, realized that that was a totally different area of expertise and profession, in that, as I'm sure many people here know, is more a first responder medical degree to help support the health of the athletes when they're injured. So um, I ended up transitioning out of that into a health behavior science major. Found out there was a minor in strength and conditioning at the school, and went that route. Throughout undergrad, I started to get involved with a one of my professors is involved with research. Dipped my toe into those waters and had some opportunities to work in different research labs. And that led me to pursuing my master's degree at UMass Amherst. And I never really had any intention of going to grad school. I'd gotten some advice that if I wanted to work in a, bigger time, NCAA hockey environment, that I would need a master's degree. So, it felt like the appropriate transition to just continue my education on. But at the time, that's really what it was to me. It was kind of a means to an end. It's if I want to have these doors open to work in higher level sport and it requires a master's degree, I might as well just get that done now. And, was really fortunate there to volunteer and work alongside the guy that worked with ice hockey at UMass at the time was a guy named Chris Boyko. He
Yep.
introduced me at the end of my first year to a guy named Eric Cressy that had a local facility. Eric is now the director of player health and performance with the New York Yankees, and has multiple facilities and several years of training Cy Young winners on both in both the American League and National League, and players on every team in MLB. And I was fortunate to cross paths with him between my 2 years at UMass Amherst, and that was really probably the fork in the road moment for me, where having the opportunity to intern with him in that summer between my 2 years was me choosing strength and conditioning over hockey as a future career path. And from there, it's been just a continuous climb to just try to improve my knowledge base, start to look at the direction that the field in general is going, and just try to upskill on an ongoing basis, so that if opportunities like this one in Boston present themselves, that I was ready for them. And I finished grad school. I worked in the private sector at a private sports training facility for 7 years. 5 of those I was able to work with the U.S. Women's National Team as well, and then was fortunate that I just kind of caught a break. A guy that I had been introduced to years before and had become a good friend of mine was named Mike Potenza, who's the head strength and conditioning coach for the San Jose Sharks. They were adding an assistant position at the time, and I had a chance to interview and was ultimately or offered that position, and was there for 2 years. And then Boston opened up. So, I don't. There's a lot more that I could share, but that feels long-winded already. So I guess I'll pass it back to you.
I mean, you always go home is what a lot of people will sit there and say for sure. Um, you know, those of us who are coming from the military, we are individuals who are ultra high performers, sometimes dealing in matters of life and death. In professional sports, the stakes are different, but also incredibly high. How do you translate the core drivers of motivation, discipline, and that team first culture from, from your experience to the team right now? And how are you motivating the guys to sit there and keep working on it, whether it be Jordan or Elias or Frazier, anyone who's on the team that, really is at the cream of their crop. But on the other hand, it's, team first. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one where it most of the individuals that are competing at this level are pretty self-motivated. So, I would say most of the other areas that you touched on, it's a team effort. What each individual player needs is different to perform at their best on a nightly basis. And even within an individual player, it's a long season. There's a lot of games. Everybody's away from the rink. Situations are different as far as what they're going through, if there's family struggles, if there's guys have a family, have young kids at home, and some of the challenges that the sleepless nights and some of those things present. So I think for me, Clay, it's really just a matter of being a consistent presence, bringing a consistent energy to the building every day. Whether we're up or down, trying to maintain some positivity and consistency in habits. Consistency in messaging, I think, is really important. So the expectations are clear of what the players are being asked to do on a day-to-day basis. And beyond that, I think it's really demonstrating a level of respect for the players on being open to listen to them and get their feedback on what they feel like, how they feel on a daily basis, what they feel like they need to perform their best. And at this level, we have players that are from all over the world. We have players that span a pretty significant age, relative to professional sports. I've realized in the real world, 35 is still young, and a lot of people are kind of getting their careers up and going. For us, that's players are hanging on and trying to extend their careers at that age. But um, I try to tap into the players' experiences and their accumulated knowledge over the years as well, and try to use that information to better serve both that specific player and then the team as a whole.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely like you having a conversation with like Nikita, for example, at 6'7" and 255 pounds from Moscow. His mindset is going to be different than like Sean, for example, or someone like that for sure. I definitely like that. Your work focus really is on assessing the athlete's current state and creating that tailored plan for maximum potential. But what is your recommendation for individuals like those here who are in that transition, leaving that high performance and going off on their own into civilian careers? Like, what sort of like performance personal assessments should they be doing on a daily basis to get their mind right and get them to get after it?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine many of the people that are taking the time out of their day to join, a conversation like this probably have a fairly high level of motivation themselves. And uh, I would feel maybe a little bit out of place giving advice to this group on how they should pursue their passions. I think for me personally, I coming out of high school was not an invested student at all. I was more, check the box, get a minimally good grade so that I could kind of move on. I kind of laugh now. I prided myself in high school on never reading a book cover to cover. I would, lean into quick summaries and spark notes and, try to find my way to kind of cheat around the work. And um, when I got to college and the curriculum was more focused on an area that I was really interested in developing a passion for, I couldn't put books down. I was reading everything that was assigned to me in class. I, have hundreds of books now that I have bought and read on my own to just continue to expand my knowledge in this area of hockey performance and preparation and injury prevention and movement assessments and nutrition and all these different areas that help support sport performance. And I think the message that I'm hoping to convey to this group is that I I don't know that you ever or you're never going to know exactly what you're going to latch onto and be passionate about until you start trying things. And if you have an opportunity to, even if you have somewhat of an interest in a specific area, if you have an opportunity to shadow somebody that does a job that you think you may want or works in an industry that you're intrigued by, it's a good way to start to get some exposure, to learn more about the pros and cons to that line of work. And you start to get passionate about it. I think it's easier to kind of channel some of your energy and your efforts into then developing more knowledge and upskilling in that specific area, which again, my experience with people with military backgrounds is that they tend to be motivated, they tend to be disciplined, and it's not a matter as much of developing those qualities. It's more a matter of channeling them and finding the best path to really use those advantages to create the future that you want. So I get questions all the time from people that are interested in strength and conditioning as a career. And obviously I think the education side of things is important, but significantly more important is finding really good mentors and finding opportunities to just start to accumulate experience in the field. And ultimately a good mentor is going to help shape some of the education that you would undergo as well, so that you're not wasting a lot of energy running in the wrong direction. That you're a little bit more efficient with whatever it is in different industries. The continuing education, the licensure, certifications, all those things can really be focused in on what's going to have the best ROI for you specifically if you have somebody in your corner that's steering you in the right direction.
I love it. I love it. We actually do have a question from the chat. John, one of our Air Force veterans, any book recommendations that are non-hockey related that you could think of top of your head to recommend for, that motivation and gaining that insight?
Yeah, if I'm scrolling up in the chat here, I think John also said he was a grizzled 35-year-old veteran, which I can appreciate. That's right in
Well,
line with some of the grizzled veterans that I get to work with. But John,
well,
there's a
that was
ton.
actually more of a comment towards you saying 35 being old. Yeah, that is a grizzled veteran in the sports industry. I'm actually like a salty, disgruntled, nearly broken 42-year-old. So yeah, sports is not in my future, but I'll read a good book.
Sure. I think there's a ton of books that I could recommend here. One that I think I really enjoyed both for the history of it and for some of the lessons that were contained in it was The Score Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh. He was the
Ooh,
head coach of the 49ers in the early 90s. Essentially one of the major driving forces for taking a franchise that was at the very bottom of the league and bringing them into what is now still considered one of the best. I know the local. I'll get eaten alive for saying this in New England, but that stretch I think is one of the greatest stretches of an organization in the history of sports. And there was a lot in that book, but one of the things that I really left with is, early on, the program was coming from such a bad place that when they started to win games, there was so much celebration and everybody was so proud of all the work that they had put in that led to them finally winning a game and then winning a second game. And you fast forward a few years, they have a couple Super Bowls under their belt, and the standard became so high that there was no more joy in celebrating the wins and the work that went into it. There was only, we expect to win or disappointment if we don't. And that was one of the things that led to Bill Walsh retiring from coaching. And, I think I've been fortunate in the teams that I've worked with that I've been a part of a lot of really successful seasons. And, you start to see the balance there that you want to maintain a really, really high standard, but you can't strip the joy and the appreciation for the work that goes into all the small wins along the way out of the game because it starts to become self-defeating. So that was one that I really enjoyed. There's a guy, Daniel Coyle, who wrote a book called The Talent Code, that speaks a lot to some of the different aspects of high performers and some of the myths around talent and talent development, talent identification. He had a follow-up book that was published several years ago called The Culture Code, which I think anybody working in team environments or even really group environments in any work situation would benefit from reading that. It just talks a lot about, some of the top cultures in sport and in industry, and, what some of the commonalities are, what the differences are, and how they went about developing that culture. So, those are a few to look into, see if any of them resonate with you. Of
I will make
Hey,
sure
thanks so
that
much. I
we
appreciate it.
course.
Well, I'll make sure that we edit some of that 49er stuff to sit there and say, New England paid. I'm just kidding. It's interesting. You say that you would be chewed up by some people in the greater New England area, but when you're inside the community and you're working with other dynamics and other groups of other teams and things like that, you definitely have a lot of high respect for them. So, for example, I came from the Army Special Operations community. A lot of people on the outside sit there and say, well, you must have a huge rivalry with the SEALs and everything like that. And it's no, we have, different ways how we attack things and things like that. But we all have a thing to do. We're all trying to get to that next level and sit there and be the best of what we're doing. So I respect that 1000% for sure. So your role being the director of performance is really broad. Could you describe what a typical day looks like and which non-coaching skill like administration, communications, operation takes up most of your time?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, my role, is when I started with Boston, I was the head performance coach, and my role was primarily to design and implement the team's off-ice training program. And then also oversee our minor league team in Providence, hire the individual that was the strength and conditioning coach there, and just ensure communication and alignment so that the programs were continuous between the two clubs. Over time that has expanded organically into, we now oversee all of our organization sports science initiatives. So any data collection that we're doing, some of the workload monitoring processes, that falls under our umbrella. I think integrating nutrition into our process as well. We have a part-time nutritionist, so she spearheads a lot of the day-to-day there, but ensuring that we're, boots on the ground, reinforcing her messages and just closing the loop on communication to make sure that players are doing everything they need to fuel themselves appropriately, to perform well and to recover. And then we also over time have tried to, tap into the expertise of our department and share that with scouting and player development and so some of these other areas that, are involved in different aspects of making a hockey club successful, as far as, identifying players that want to be brought into the organization, understanding, what some of their gaps may be, particularly obviously in our area from a physical standpoint, helping to communicate expected timelines on when a player may be, quote unquote, NHL ready from a physical standpoint, and then making sure that the communication with those players, not just in terms of, outlining expectations, but also in making sure that they have the resources they need to meet the expectations that we lay out for them. Our group has grown in a lot of those areas over this is year 8 for me in Boston, so over that time span. And I part of my responsibility is hiring really good people to support all of those missions. And I'm really fortunate to work alongside a great group of people, organizationally, from the front office to the coaching staff, the players, the medical staff, equipment staff, but then the people, Tim Labassi or Peter Nelson, that both work with me in Boston. And we just hired a young man named Wyatt Lawrence to run the show in Providence for us this season. And those three really deserve all the credit for any success that our department has had because of how hard they work and the expertise that they bring. So that's a little bit, I guess, on kind of the evolution of our position in our department. But on a day-to-day basis, Clay, we kind of joke that it's like Groundhog's Day 1 or Groundhog's Day 2. We have game days and we have non-game days. And typically non-game days, the team practices at 11. Players show up to the rink several hours ahead of time. They have meetings, they have media responsibilities. Sometimes there's signings and community things that they have to tend to. But as a general rule, they're showing up a few hours before practice. They're getting treatments done. They're, making sure their equipment's set. They'll come into the gym and they'll do some preparation work with us. They'll go skate, then they'll come off and they'll go through cool downs and, any other follow-up meetings and media and stuff like that. For us, our players, we have some segment of our roster that is training almost every day of the week. So, that's part of the individualization side of things for us, is that it's not maybe like it would be in college and in some youth settings where, every Monday and Thursday or Tuesday and Thursday, the whole team is going to come in and do the same training session. There's, way more variability based on, players' recoveries, based on their playing times, based on any, aches and pains that they might be dealing with from, previous games and that sort of thing. So, and then, obviously the training cadence that they feel best to and what they respond the best to. So, every day players will come in, they'll go through some sort of pre-skate preparation with us. And then we have guys that are training and working out off the ice every day. We also collaborate with our medical staff on any players that are that are, I say injured, but there's, as everybody here can attest to, there's, things that cross a clinical threshold of injury. And then there are other things that are nagging aches and pains that, we all live and our players play through that, we try to be an extension of our medical staff to help support whatever they're trying to do from an intervention standpoint, whether it's, specific things to help improve mobility or range of motion around certain joints, whether it's more of a control issue. There's some different exercise strategies we can use to help players minimize the risk of future pain and injury, and help kind of move them more towards a healthier state. So that most of that work takes place before they skate. Some players will come in and do some training work after the ice session as well. When the players finish up, we use a tracking system during practices to, better understand what the physical stressors were of that practice. So we are, collecting those units, downloading that information, processing that data, putting together a simple report for the coaches, looking ahead from a scheduling standpoint, providing recommendations to the coaching staff on broader schedule topics. Should we be practicing on certain days? Should we, only have a segment of our roster practice on a certain day? Should we have days off? Those sorts of things. But then also, if there are individual players that, for various reasons, whether it's, an adjusting role, as far as what's being asked of them, what line they're playing on, what their playing time looks like. If a player maybe was suffered an in-game injury and then, a couple days later they're in a good spot, we want to always make sure that players are prepared to not just play the role that is currently being asked of them, but to level up one. So, for example, in hockey, with forwards, we have 4 forward lines that dress every game. The first 2 lines will generally play somewhere around, 16 to 20 minutes a night. The third line's a little bit lower, more in the 14 to 16-minute range. And the third line could be 8 minutes. It could be 12 minutes, the fourth line could be 8 minutes, could be, up to 12 minutes. But there's a pretty significant disparity there. And almost every year that I've worked in the NHL, we've had a player that has gone from a healthy scratch, so out of the lineup, to really quickly being asked to play first line minutes. And there's various reasons for why those situations have presented themselves, but every year it's a good reminder that we have to keep, even if players are kind of out for any given reason of a game, we have to keep them prepared to play first line minutes, and make sure that if they are asked to do that and if they're given that opportunity to do that, there's a lot of things that they have to worry about. We don't want their physical preparation and their conditioning to be one of them. So,
yeah.
that's kind of the practice day. The game day, the morning is very similar. Most of the time we'll have a morning skate, which is just a really quick 10 to 15 minute, almost like an on ice warm up. They'll go through a couple flow drills. Players will stay out and work on some individual skills, mostly shooting, getting some puck touches in so their hands feel good going into that night. They'll come off, some will come into the gym, spin, do some cool down, rolling, stretching, grab lunch, and then they go home. And there's kind of a little gap in the middle of the day for us from 1 to 4ish before we're then back at the game rink and running through the pregame preparation. Most of our games start at 7, so we're back at the rink at 4. Players are, we have kind of drinks and different things that we'll make to, help make sure the players are staying hydrated and that they're fueled appropriately heading into the game. During the first period of the game, the players that are not playing, so we typically dress 20 but roster 23. So there's 3 extra players that will come in and work out during the first period of the game. Second period, we're usually making like post-game shakes for all the players. And then third period, we're preparing any post-game training that certain individuals may do based on playing time, or that the whole roster, if we're doing a full team training session afterwards, will do. So, obviously we go into every training session with a bigger picture plan of what we want to accomplish and what we want that program to look like. But we're frequently making last minute adjustments just based on what the situation that day is presenting, and what certain players are going through, and if a player takes a puck off the foot in the first period and they limp their way through the rest of the game, that's going to impact what we're asking them to do from a lower body training standpoint, for example, after the game. So that's kind of it. Those days can be pretty long. We're typically in the rink in the mornings between 6:30 and 7 a.m. on those days. Some guys will go home in the middle of the day for an hour or two, and then, you get home at 11 or 11:30 at night. And then if those days are on the road, basically, the overwhelming majority of the time, right after the game, you're shipping off to the airport and flying out to the next city. So, it keeps the days interesting, but yeah, we pretty much run one of two schedules most days throughout the season.
I love it. I love it. Jeffrey, I'm going to call on you here for a second so that way Kevin can answer both of your questions. But I wanted to follow up with that medical transition that you were talking about in terms of that performance. When you start crossing that barrier into like a real medical need for the player, have you ever had and you probably have, but when you've had those moments to where you've had a clash with some of the medical staff, what are some of the things that you're working through in terms of that cross-functional relationship to come to a unified approach for a player in that situation? Let's say that they think it's a more severe strain than it actually is. You have all those different variables. Like, what are you working? What's your thought process working with those cross-functional teams in that moment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't think in any environment, but particularly because of how fast-paced professional hockey is, you're playing 3 to 4 games every week. There's things are changing dynamically all the time. The example of a player taking a puck off a foot, or taking a knee to the thigh and having a Charlie horse. Those things come up on a period by period basis in games and regularly throughout practice too. So communication is critical between everybody involved. That's the coaching staff, the medical staff, our group, even the equipment managers. Having an idea of, in certain cases, players need to adjust their padding based on injuries that they're going through. Even the hollow and how the skates are sharpened can be adjusted depending on ice quality, and players that have a history of soft tissue injuries around their hip and pelvis and lower abdominal area. Everybody needs to be involved and everybody needs to communicate openly. I think for me personally, Clay, I there needs to be a level of respect and a level of communication, but I think disagreement can be really productive. It opens the door for conversations that allow people with different perspectives to better understand where the other person is coming from, and it's an opportunity for everybody involved to learn. I think most of the challenges that we've had over the and I wouldn't even call them challenges, but I think we're like the areas that we frequently talk about are related to the extent to which an injury is going to affect other areas of their body, and the training strategies that we have available to them. And I think traditionally, if you have a high school kid and they break their arm, they're going to go to the doctor, they're going to get a cast, and the doctor's going to say, you can't do anything for 6 to 8 weeks. And we view that as, you have a broken arm and then you have 99% of your body that is totally healthy, functional, and trainable. And in our world, because every game missed for a player not only has, economic consequences for the organization, as far as, an investment that's been made from a contract standpoint that they are now playing one less game on, there's also, every bit as importantly, impact on the team and the team's, the abilities and the talent that we're able to put on the ice when we have some of our better players that aren't able to go. So, we can't afford to delay things a day longer than they absolutely need to be. And as a part of that, you take a player that in our environment is used to playing 3 or 4 games a week, practicing 2 times a week on top of that, training several times a week off the ice on top of that, they are at a level of conditioning that is, at a really high level and needs to be supported with a certain amount of work to make sure that they can transition back to that safely. If you have a 6 week injury recovery process and you do nothing in the interim, you're completely detraining all the other systems in your body. So now there's a time period where those things need to be retrained and ramped up to make sure that they can appropriately transition back. And it takes longer. So and that's overlooking some of the cognitive benefits. Athletes want to feel like athletes. They don't want to be shut down for long periods of time. They want to keep moving and keep competing and finding ways to improve themselves. There's also benefits to healing with certain training strategies that can promote, a systemic response, meaning, there's certain hormones and other things that are produced as a result of training that can have a positive impact on healing. Those things can all facilitate a faster recovery as well, but ensuring that whenever the injured area heals and is at a point that you can start to ramp up the loading through that specific area, that the rest of their body is trained at as close to as high of a level as it was pre-injury as possible is critical to, minimizing that transition time on the back end. So, a lot of our conversations are, if a player has a lower body injury, it's, one, understanding what they're doing from a treatment standpoint for the players, how we can best support that, strengthening other areas up the chain. If somebody has a foot injury, you can still find creative ways to train their lower body above the foot, and then making sure that their mobility and their strength around their hips and core is maintained is really important. But then other aspects of it too, of, what can we do on the other leg to make sure that that leg is not detraining as the other one heals. So, those are a lot of the conversations that we're having, is trying to better understand what players are able to do as they're working through injuries, and ensuring that we're really pushing the envelope in making sure that we're programming and we're asking everything that is safe and appropriate for the player at that stage. And I think, it sounds like you're a sports fan. I imagine you're not the only one here that has an interest in sports. And, you frequently hear of some of these athletes that have, an ACL tear or an Achilles tear or whatever the case is, where, the expected timeline is 9 months to a year and they come back several months ahead of that projection. And, that is a testament to the communication that goes on behind the scenes with the organization, and the ability, traditionally, if my son, for example, gets injured and he goes to a private practice physical therapy clinic, he may see a PT once a week or maybe twice a week. So, they're asking people to go home, do certain things, come back a week later, and then you see how they feel, and then they make adjustments. We in our environment are able to make those adjustments on not even an hour by hour basis, a minute by minute basis. So you can really finely tune the stressors that you're placing on the athlete, and gauge, exactly how hard you can push and when you need to pull back on a minute by minute basis with them, not on a week by week basis. And that's a lot of the reasons why, athletes that are in those environments are able to beat projected timelines, because there's just a microscope on the stressors and the response to those that can be finely tuned on a more regular basis.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. I actually went through that myself. I actually tore my labrum, and at first it was ice and everything, and my team doc was like, there's not really much we can do. And that's actually how I met Ted. Was he was actually up at Fort Bragg, and I went down to Thor 3, and he came up with this completely customized plan for my recovery, to where within 3 months post surgery, I was 100% certified and able to go operational again. So just seeing where it has come from to where it is now, that's why I admire guys like you, because you really are taking the best of the best and you really are amplifying everything. Jeffrey, you cannot sit there and ask questions like that and not have me call on you. So I'm going to have you sit there and ask those questions to the group. Are you up? You still up, sir?
Yes, I'm here. So, how you doing, Kevin? Thanks for talking with us today. So, my question: if someone has no background in this field but understands basic performance, nutrition timing for performance, and then mental preparation, would we have a shot in pursuing this career path, or what advice would you give us if we did want to go down this career path?
Yeah, I mean, I think our strength and conditioning, sport performance, that gets lumped into a career path along with personal training. And I think one of the things that the National Strength and Conditioning Association, who's the governing body for strength and conditioning, they have the kind of the uh, gold standard entry level certification for strength and conditioning. I think it's been a prerogative of theirs and of the people that have been around the industry to try to raise the barrier to entry in a productive way. Meaning, we don't want people that have a fleeting interest in personal training to go take a weekend certification and then be presented alongside people that have spent you know uh not just formal education as far as getting bachelor's degrees, but potentially decades in the field honing their craft, and on paper it looks like they're the same. So I think there is a lot of value in Jeff, in pursuing the education side of things if there is a real interest in working in high level sport. I think to your point, that's not always feasible for people depending on their stage of life and stage of career and some of the other competing demands from a family and lifestyle standpoint. And what I would say is that there are more private sector facilities now than ever before. So, when I was growing up as a kid, like, there were some people that were running, quote unquote, speed and agility courses in local public fields twice a week, but there was no, within an hour of me, there was no like private sports performance facility. Now, with where we are in Dedham, Massachusetts, there's probably a dozen within a 15-minute drive of here. And, I think there are tons of really, really great coaches that work and run a lot of those businesses. And, I would say if you have an interest in working in this type of field, that would be the best place to start, would be to find somebody that has a private facility that does a good job, that, could mentor. If you have, you had mentioned an understanding of performance and nutrition timing and mental preparation, all of the way that you action that knowledge, it depends on the context of, who the athletes are, what sport are they competing in, what's their age, what's their gender, what's the environment, what are some of the challenges that they're facing. And you can learn to utilize the knowledge that you've developed over the years more appropriately for a given population and a given environment by working alongside really good mentors that have experience in that environment. So I would say, like, they're working in professional sport without certainly a bachelor's degree in the field would be a really big challenge and a tall ask. I think a lot of people are requiring that, but there's certainly opportunities to work with athletes in really great environments. I mean, my goal coming out of grad school was to run a facility that trained hockey players, and I would just really luckily really like cross paths with a guy that I had played youth hockey with that was opening up a facility to do exactly that, timing exactly when I graduated with my master's degree. So I kind of fell into that, but there's a lot of benefits to working in the private sector. And that would be, I think that would probably be an area that you would have a really good opportunity to pursue a career in, and would enjoy too.
All right.
Jennifer, you got to ask your other question, man, because I can't let that hanging out.
Oh, I got you. So the other question, I said, have you been Have you been working with May because his performance is optimized this season?
No, I haven't crossed paths with him. You know, I think he's in really good hands. I've gotten to know part of the staff down with the Patriots, and you know, they from a medical and performance standpoint do a great job. And obviously, there were some changes to their coaching staff this year that they they seem to have turned a corner and are on a great path. So he's been a lot of fun to watch. I'm looking forward to watching their game tonight.
Do you have cross pollination with the other teams, or do you mostly just focus on the guys?
No, I think you know, there's like you had referenced earlier, there's not just a mutual respect across the sports. I think most of us view it as an opportunity to learn from some of the challenges and the approach to solving problems that other sports take. So, you know, I've over the years have really great colleagues and friends that work in all the other major sports, including the MLS. So, you know, in Boston, you know, I probably have the closest relationships with the staff in the Celtics. Their practice facilities directly next to ours. A good friend of mine for a long time has worked with them for a long time, and then we share a game arena in TD Garden. So, you know, we communicate regularly because we share gym space there. So, you know, we share resources. So we need to, you know, kind of be on the same page for what needs to be in there and making sure that we're managing that space appropriately. But yeah, I think that that's there's a lot to learn from how people in other sports are approaching the problems that they're facing. And that's something that I try to tap into as often as I can.
But it's not like, the Celtics guys are coming over there and be like, hey, you need to pick your brain on something. It's, just more a little bit more passive besides that, organization, gym space and everything like that. So that's cool. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, obviously you can tell you got a few Boston kids here. Now, you know, looking at future and long-term strategy for people, what is the single most important skill or piece of knowledge that you had to acquire in the past 5 years to remain relevant and continue to grow yourself as an individual and grow your organization and your company?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a challenging one. I think, you know, one of the things that has really emerged a lot in our area over that last 5 year window is just the presence of data. And you know, there was when I first entered this field, you know, it was pretty common to take a team of athletes through like training camp testing, and then that was more or less the extent. That was the beginning and end of data collection in any formal capacity throughout the course of a season until the off season. And then you know, you might be retesting some things in the off season and then again the next training camp. And, you know, now we are being provided some data streams on a consistent day-to-day basis. So, you know, I think learning how to productively work with numbers and not be overwhelmed by them, you know, start to use information to answer questions and not to, you know, just kind of pick around and look at a bunch of fancy charts that maybe aren't actually moving the needle and, you know, in the player's preparation or in their health or performance has been the biggest one. So, and you know, it's some of that, to be totally honest, Clay, is like recognizing the limitations of my knowledge and better understanding what skill sets I need in the people that support our department around us. And, you know, that's an area where, you know, analytics departments across sports are growing, you know, depending on your stance for better or worse. But you know, that is an area that continues to grow on a regular basis. And for us, you know, that means that there are resources there that can help us navigate the, you know, larger data sets and use those to kind of distill things down that are more actionable on a day-to-day basis for us and for our coaching staff.
I love it. Yeah, it's sort of like the Moneyball influence, not to sit there and bring in the movie to it, but yeah, just understanding the data and everything that comes in. I don't, please don't judge me. I live in Denver now, and obviously the baseball team here just went through a massive restructure, and now bringing in Paul to sit there and like really build up like data analytics and player performance things like that. It's going to be really interesting for the Rockies. Meanwhile, the Avalanche to continue just to be the Avalanche. But I digress. I apologize. Before I ask my last question, does anybody else here have any questions for Kevin? Going once? Going twice? I guess we have a lot of Rangers fans in here today, Kevin. I apologize. But my last formal question for you is, I'm sorry, someone came off
the
mute.
Lightning.
Oh, Tim. Oh, Lightning. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Whatever. Forget them. My last formal question for you, Kevin, is if you go back to the beginning of your career and give yourself one piece of advice of finding balance between the high demand of your work and personal life, what would it be?
I that's a great question too, because one of the biggest things that leads to people exiting this line of work is burnout. And, I think, Clay, I have a little bit maybe of a different perspective on balance. I don't know that it really exists. I think that there are periods of time that you need to put the blinders on and go all in on certain things, and you need to extend yourself, whether that's working longer hours, whether it's working harder in the hours that you have, whether it's expanding your skill sets and learning new things, or whatever the case is. I think there are periods where you need to really push all your chips in and go all in on certain areas of work. And the reality of that is that it comes at a cost. And I think having an awareness of what that cost is, having an awareness of how that affects the other people in your life, being sensitive to those things, but then also knowing that that level of intensity and effort isn't sustainable, and trying to build in periods where you finish a project and you slow down a little bit. But I don't know that balance is really this daily harmony that it maybe is chalked up to be. I think for me right now, in this environment, I know that when we're in season, that my wife is taking the brunt of the extra load at home of, spending extra time raising our kids, shuttling them around to school and to sports and birthday parties, and taking care of our dog, and also working full time. So, part of my balance is, when I am home, is being more in tune with what the needs are of the kids, what her needs are, and trying to be as present for them as possible. But I think I had some different stages earlier in my career where I'm kind of looking around and thinking, is it time for me to make a change? Is a different environment a good fit for me right now? And I had really great mentors that just said, like, you're on the right path, just keep going and keep working. And I hindsight's 2020, but I'm really fortunate to be in the position that I'm in now, and appreciative of all the hard work that led to it, and the support and the pushes that I got early in my career to keep going when maybe the light at the end of the tunnel wasn't as visible for me. So I think it's probably a matter of don't ignore the signs of burnout would be the advice that I would give to myself. But I don't, again, like, I think the intensity is required to get better. So you need to kind of push forward when it's time to push, and then ease off the gas a little bit when that opportunity presents itself, and maybe appreciate that that's going to help you the next time that you need to push again, and not necessarily view that as a sign of weakness or of slowing down in a negative way.
That's absolutely, I love it. And that's definitely something that we all should hold on to, is that sometimes you can't flip that switch. So you just got to find that good juggling balance act for sure. But yeah, we're coming up on top of the hour, Kevin. I know you're a busy guy, and I don't want to keep you any longer, but I will say from the bottom of my heart, as a kid who grew up in South Boston, it's been an honor and a privilege chatting with you. Everything that you do for the team, and just who you are in making sure that people are performing at the best, is an absolutely remarkable thing to do. So I do want to say thank you very much for your time. Everything that you're doing and everything that you are as an individual. I really look forward in the future having these conversations with you some more. But keep doing what you're doing. The guys are doing great. And that's, as the one Boston guy out here in Denver, you're killing it, man. So keep up the good work, and we appreciate you, sir.
No, thanks, Clay. I appreciate it. It's an honor to have the opportunity to speak with you guys, and I sincerely appreciate the invite. I appreciate all the sacrifices that everybody here makes, not just in being here today, but obviously in the line of work that you guys have pursued to help support the freedoms that, frankly, my family and I all take for granted. So, thank you to all of you for the work that you've done, and hopefully everybody enjoyed a nice Veterans Day earlier in the week here.
It's definitely one of those fun ones. But Kevin, appreciate you. Have a great rest of your night, and we will reconnect sometime in the near future, sir.